St Giles Files. Hi folks, just before we get into it, a little correction to make. When I was listening back, I realised I'd made an error. It was actually William Byrne that clad the cathedral and not William Chambers. Obviously, you have to choose which version of me to believe now, but I would believe this one. Hello, welcome to this week's episode of the St Giles Files. This week's episode will be concerning the Weathercock, which is the gilded cockerel at the top of the cathedral. And talking of the top of the cathedral, I'm also going to discuss the tower. Now, I'm going to be presenting the object this week, and I'll leave Jess and Ciara to do the discussion around it afterwards. So I thought I may as well just jump straight into it. It's probably best to start with the tower itself, given that that's what the Weathercock sits on top. So the tower was built over a load of different phases. The main part of the tower is the original part and was built, well, we think there's been a tower since the 12th century, but what you see today is largely 14th century. Now, the crown spire is the interesting bit. This is largely thought to be English originally, but crown spires seem to have found a lot more popularity in Scotland. So the first one was either in London or St Nicholas's in Newcastle, but once it comes to Scotland in St Giles, it seems to find a lot more popularity. As to why that is, I don't know, because we also get crown spires in Aberdeen, in Paisley, the Wallace Monument, Linlithgow, so there end up being quite a few of them. Anyway, back to St Giles. So we think our crown spire was added around 1495, 1500, but it has been mucked about with since then. A major restoration happened around 1648, and then another one happened a bit more recently around the 90s. Now, without stepping too much on what the girls might say later, the final thing I'd like to say about the tower is it really is an important piece of the cathedral, not only because it's the most obvious piece, but also because it's the only original stonework from the outside. And we'll talk about this maybe in a later edition, but the Chambers restoration clad the outside of the cathedral except for the tower in a new layer of stone. So the tower really is the only original part from the outside. Right, so now we're done with that, I think we'll introduce the Weathercock. The oldest record we have of a Weathercock at the top of St Giles Cathedral is from 1567, when an Alexander Honeyman, what a great last name by the way, replaced the Weathercock, which means that there must have been one prior to that, but we only have a record from 1567. Now, our Weathercock at the moment is not that one. It's decidedly younger, awfully younger, from 1667, so about 100 years later. And when I was researching this, I noticed it was 353 years, which I thought at the time, oh yeah, 350 years. But I didn't want to say 350 years because I thought 353 was important. Because if you say 350, people think 300 or 400. They don't think 350. So 353 years. Now, it weighed about 10 kilos. And the really impressive thing is 3 kilos of that is its tail. So almost a third of it is just the tail. Which I suppose, cockerels do have huge tails. But anyway. It cost £90 and 10 shillings, and I decided to use the Bank of England's converter just to see what that means. And I suppose you always think things are going to be huge, but the cost today, in real terms, £21,776 and 94 pence, which was a shock, I think. I mean, I suppose knowing the cost of other things that happen in the cathedral, 21 grand for the Weathercock seems a lot, but maybe gilding something was a bit more of a labour intensive, and gold was possibly more scarce. So yeah, maybe that's fine, but I don't know. It was just a shock. Now, as I'm sure you can all imagine, since then it's been repaired, regilded. Everything's been given a good going over, and so with the next point we check in with the Weathercock is Christmas 1979. Now, for the most part, the Weathercock is expected to be at 90 degrees. Unfortunately, just before Christmas 1979, a lot of people had noticed that it was not at 90 degrees. One of them was said to be a police officer who came to the cathedral and pointed out the Weathercock was leaning rather badly. Now, we would have hoped that only one part of it was not supporting itself, but when the repair folk went up, they noticed that not only was the Weathercock's rod itself not looking too good, but the stonework beneath was also looking pretty shoddy. Incidentally, you can find the stonework in the Holy Blood aisle in the cathedral. It gets called the Dalek these days, and if you come into the cathedral once we're open again, you will see exactly why that is. Now, The repair job was rather interesting because once they got the weathercock down, they noticed it was actually in really, really horrible condition. And part of that may have been due to kind of on the run repairs previously, which we'll talk about a little bit in a sec. They really had a quite a big job ahead after the inspection. So much so that one of the eyes was completely gone, no sign of it, and the other one looked as if it was the bottom of a glass wine bottle. Now we still have that, and I can personally attest to the fact that, yeah, it does look like the bottom of an old glass wine bottle. The rest of it was said to be in really, really poor state. The gilding was coming off. One side looked like the gilding had completely just gone. So they decided to re-gild it, and they put it on display in the cathedral for a few months prior to putting it back up. So now it's back up atop its perch, both eyes working, watching over the city once again, as it has been as different ones have been for 500 years. So, Jess, Ciara, over to you for the discussion.
Thanks for that introduction, Stephen. So now it's going to be me, Jess.
And me, Ciara.
And we're going to chat a little bit more about weather vanes, the towers. So I'm going to start with a little bit about weather vanes in general and people having it be a cockerel or a rooster at the top of their weather vane. The word weather vane is Old English. Vane actually comes from the word vana, which means flag. So that's pretty neat. I thought like a flag blowing in the breeze.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah, isn't it? It's kind of cute. I was like, oh, that's nice. It's named what it looks like. And then weather comes from vida, which is also Old English. And there you go. There's some etymology for your afternoon listening. The weather vane was independently invented in two different places, so in ancient Greece and ancient China. And the earliest Greek one was thought to be shaped like Triton, and like sort of Triton's, I'm gesturing to you, Ciara, but they won't be able to see. I'm sorry.
I want everyone to know that she's doing some great gesturing. I'm very sad you're not able to see it.
Like the trident moves with the wind. So it was Triton and his sort of like trident that he was holding moving with the wind. And the rooster, the oldest version of a weather vane that's shaped like a rooster, is from Lombardy in 820 CE. Apparently, the rooster became really, really popular because people were thinking that there's the story about St. Peter where I'm sorry, I have to check the story of St. Peter. Ciara.
Is this the cockerel denying Jesus 3 times and then the cockerel crows? Is it that story?
It sure is. Thank you for your churchy help. But yeah, so it's the story about the cockerel crowing 3 times. And so St. Peter and roosters became sort of like combined. A lot of the medieval artwork of St. Peter would have a rooster in it somewhere.
The fact that St. Giles doesn't have a crucifix weather vane, which I think is quite popular, that's the reason for it. It's not because the Church of Scotland didn't want to have an association with crucifixes or anything. It is actually a pre-existing sort of biblical reference.
I think it either was a pre-existing biblical reference, that's one of the big thoughts, or it was like the classic sort of Catholic Church style of incorporating a previous reference in artwork or architecture and like sort of claiming it's biblical, because I think there was some other stuff about how it could be like Gothic symbolism of the sun because roosters crow when it's dawn, and then they were like, oh no, it's all a Bible thing, and then sort of like sold it that way to lots of Roman Catholic churches around, and especially because like St. Peter was thought of as like the first pope. So I was reading about other weather vanes. I always like a good boat-shaped weather vane, bit rarer but quite nice.
Any sort of biblical references in the boat-shaped ones, or are they more nautical usually?
I do not know, Ciara. That didn't come up. I was thinking of my old school. They have a boat. I think it might be a sort of nautical. I would have thought like money-making colonial thing, but I don't know if the boat thing is older.
I don't know. I feel like we should expand this section into our own personal podcast where it's just like 2 gals chat about weather vanes.
I know. Well, one of the resources I looked at was actually a blog called The History Girls, and I was like, wait, have we moved like through time? Is this us? It was about another church weather vane too. So
I'm glad we have a sort of sisterhood across the globe who also want to talk about weather vanes and historical podcasts.
I know. It's the hot topic. That's, I think, a lot of what I've got. Another little sort of like tidbit, which I thought was quite neat is that in the Bayeux Tapestry from 1070, so the big massive tapestry that shows the Norman conquest of England, there's a tiny little image of a guy putting up a little rooster weather vane on the top of Westminster Abbey. So
very cool.
Yeah,
that's really interesting. Maybe we can try and get a picture of that and upload it with the podcast so people will be able to
I think that would be a really good idea because it is very cute.
Very nice.
Yeah.
One of the things I was thinking about listening to Stephen's introduction, talking about how long we've had a weather vane or a weathercock on the roof, is how much that little guy must have seen in his life. Because, I mean, so St Giles, I looked this up earlier, the elevation of the Tower of St Giles is 161 feet, which makes it, I think, probably one of the tallest points of Edinburgh. And certainly if you look at the Edinburgh skyline, the St Giles Crown spire is probably one of the most iconic things that you're going to see. So it's kind of been able to look down on the creation of Edinburgh as a city. Yeah, is there anything in particular that you would have liked to see if you were the weather vane yourself?
What would I have liked to see? I think it would have honestly been nice just being that high to see how the city sort of grew outward. Because I think, so from at least 1567, but earlier, so that was right after the Reformation. So you'd see the whole city sort of growing out from the Royal Mile. You'd see a lot of actually the building of Holyrood Palace right down the road from when Holyrood Abbey was there. And the crumbling of Holyrood Abbey. So 2 for 1 in that one spot. But I think as well as that, one thing I was thinking is that actually you see over the Firth of Forth, which I think is one of the sort of unsung but really lovely bits of not quite Edinburgh skyline, but right after Edinburgh skyline. And you can see all the boats change, the bridges being built. Within the city as well, if you looked the other direction, you'd see the Norloch way back then, which was the reason for Edinburgh being quite a stinky city called Old Reekie, because everybody, when they chucked their buckets / like chamber pots out, it would all go down the hill. I don't know why I started talking about this, but it would all go down the hill and it would sort of form into this like Norloch or lake, which was really, really gross. I can't remember when it got drained, but when like the new town was made, I think that all got sort of drained and made into Prince Street Gardens. So now, well, not right now, but nowadays, that's where people often hang out and have picnics and stuff now. And you would have seen all that change over time. So yeah, I think our building's at a nice seat to see the city change.
I think I would have loved to see the building itself change as well during the sort of Burns and Chambers restoration, where the very kind of fabric of the building was undergoing a lot of change. I think it would have been interesting to sort of see that from a bird's eye view, literally, I guess, a bird's eye view.
I think especially when I imagine that sort of restoration, and one of the big things they're doing is like kicking out all the little stall holders around the cathedral. I always imagine like in the architectural notes we have, that's written as like 2 sentences, but I imagine shop owners who have been there for like generations or whatever, selling their wares in the Royal Mile. That would have been a classic high drama, small town situation. So yeah, I bet there would have been a lot of human drama there to watch.
Definitely, and some kind of later historical events that happened in St Giles, I think I would have liked to see as well. Speaking of which, shall we do a sort of a very smooth segue into talking a bit about the tower itself? So basically, when we were thinking about the weather vane as an object to present, I immediately started thinking about the tower itself. And I think it might be worth talking about that a little bit because it's got its own kind of unique history within the building, and some pretty interesting things have happened up and around it. I know Stephen has already done a really great introduction about it. So I'm just going to talk a little bit more, and then we're going to have a bit of a discussion about things that happened. I think we're even going to touch on your favourite. I feel like for context, I should say that Jess also works at Holyrood Palace, so she's my go-to girl for anything Mary Queen of Scots related.
I know. I was really feeling like I should know more royal. It was actually James IV today that was like, dang, I don't actually know that much about him. Yeah.
I think by the end of this series and this period of lockdown, I'm going to have a sort of insane timeline of all the Jameses just scrawled on my wall. It does kind of feel like it's going that way. I'm also going to point out, Jess didn't say this earlier, but I feel like I can. We're actually joined by Jess's dog, Nala. So she is the silent third partner or fourth partner, because you've got Stephen as well, in this enterprise. So
it goes Ciara, Jess, Nala, and Stephen. That's the order of control in this episode, I'd say.
Yeah, pretty much. Talking about the tower, I would start off with a very nice quote by Cameron Lees. So Cameron Lees, or the very Reverend Cameron Lees, was the minister of St Giles for a long time, so kind of late 1800s to early 1900s. And he oversaw the chambers restoration, which was really one of the biggest restorations that the cathedral has had, and was hugely influential in making it look as it does today. So basically a man about town, I shall call him. And he said, he also wrote a lot of histories about St Giles and about other churches, so he does know what he's talking about. And he said Edinburgh would not be Edinburgh without it, without the crown steeple, which I think is a very nice phrase, because as I said before, it is quite an iconic part of the skyline. So thank you, Cameron Lees. I'm sure he'll come up again in a later podcast. The tower as we know it now is part of an extension of the chancel, which dates from the 1460s and was a project that aimed to improve St Giles by adding the vaulted roof that we see today. The crown spire itself was added between 1495 and 1500 during an extension, as Stephen mentioned before. And if you go into the tower itself, as you can do if you come on one of my weekend tower tours, which we'll get onto in a bit.
They're great. I've gone on them.
Truly life-changing. Many people have said that to me. But if you come on the tower tour, you can actually see the original beams, which are still there. And urban legend says that they're reclaimed from ships that were wrecked on the nearby coast. Whether that is true or not is hard to say, but they've certainly held their own over the years, I think. And as Stephen also mentioned, I think it is the only part of the cathedral that has the original stone visible, so it isn't encased in Victorian sandstone.
As a tidbit, just to back up that it's wood from boats, one of our volunteers, I think it was with you, Ciara, but when we were showing him around, he was saying that when you have beams of wood on a boat, it's not always nailed together. It's sometimes like sort of interlocking shapes of wood so that it's flush, so that there's no little leaks from the ocean. And I think he saw some of those little flush interlocking bits in that wood. So there you go, backing up that theory.
Maybe it is true. Even before these beams were part of the tower, which, as I'm going to go into in a minute, has seen a lot of its own sort of historical drama. They had their own lives before that. And I think actually a lot of St Giles and a lot of buildings at the time are made from recycled materials. So for instance, we have a 12th century gravestone just in part of the wall, which I think it's the gravestone of a knight, because it's got like the St George's cross on it. But that's just being used as part of the wall.
We've got the 14th century sort of city coat of arms as well, just plugged into the wall from the extension you're talking about, because it's in the eastern part of the building. So we've got all sorts of recycled little bits, and the ET face.
St Giles was upcycling long before it was cool.
Yeah.
So as I said, the tower has seen its fair share of historical drama. I think possibly most notably was when Kirkcaldy, a name that I practiced in the mirror before this, but still did not get right. Kirkcaldy of Grange used the tower during what was known as the siege between Leith and Edinburgh, or the Lang Siege, or the Long Siege. And basically, this is where I'm going to rely on your support a little bit, because it's a slightly grey area of my knowledge. So in April...
I think you'd be a darker grey for me.
There's a 50 Shades of Grey joke in there somewhere, but we're both too adults. In April 1570, Kirkcaldy, who I believe was made governor of Edinburgh by Mary Queen of Scots, held Edinburgh Castle for her after the assassination of her brother, the Regent Moray. If you're interested, when the cathedral is open, you can come and see a stained glass window of him being assassinated. He ordered all of the king's supporters to leave Edinburgh, although initially John Knox and John Craig refused to go, and Kirkcaldy drilled holes into the roof of St Giles so men could be in the tower and could potentially shoot down through these holes. And he also installed a cannon.
For sniping?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. That's crazy.
Yeah, I know. Well, I mean, Edinburgh was kind of like almost under siege.
Yeah, they're pretty violent times, that sort of era, I guess.
And I guess we've talked already about the elevation of St Giles. So if you're going to put a cannon anywhere in the city, maybe that's the place to do it.
Very good place to go. Good vantage point, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. As far as I know, the cannon was never used, but I think that's kind of the closest that St Giles has come to actually being the site of a full-on battle. So that was really interesting. And there's a few other sort of strange little things that have happened in the tower, if you would like me to go into them.
Yeah, why not? Before I do though, can I just say, this man's name, is it like Kirkcaldy, like Kerr?
No, it's Kirkcaldy.
Yeah, like the place. Okay, good. I thought it was the place, and then sorry if this is boring for like literally everyone else, but I'm from kind of near Kirkcaldy.
I think it's very interesting.
So I was like, is it Kirkcaldy or is it Kirkcaldy? So that was...
that's what happens when you let somebody with a markedly English accent try and talk about Scottish.
No, it's nice. It's better than Kirkcaldy, so you're winning.
Okay, I'll take that.
Non-Scottish accents on our podcast.
So great little anecdotes about the roof. The first of which is possibly the most dramatic, and that is what we tend to call the Flaming Angel incident, or maybe only I call them that. So at some point between 1713 and 1715, 2 medical students from Edinburgh took a goat or a sheep, I'm not sure, to the crown of the tower. So right kind of underneath where the crown bit is, you can actually go onto it. I've been there for some maintenance. It's quite scary. And they tied, we're going to call it a goat, I think, to the...
I think that's nice sort of biblical imagery. That makes it less sad if it's a goat than a sheep somehow. Although I do like both, but
Yeah. I mean, I think I'll say this now. It was fine. Let's get that out of the way. So they tied it to the largest bell. So at that point, the bells were in the actual crown of the spire, and it was called the meat cage for reasons that are totally beyond me. If anyone knows why it's called the meat cage, please get hold of us. As we tell it, we have
info@stgilescathedral.org.uk. I want to know.
Yeah.
Why was the bell tower called the meat cage?
We would really like to know. Also, it's what I would call a nightclub if I had a nightclub, but that's by the by.
Yeah, I think so.
So they tied it to the largest bell, and they actually set its tail on fire, unfortunately. And as it was kind of thrashing around, the bell was tolling, and people looked up and they saw what they believed to be a sort of flaming angel, which is one of the signs of the Day of Judgment. So there was huge panic, this belief that this angel had sort of descended from heaven onto the roof of St Giles, which, to be fair, if you were going to be descending from heaven onto Edinburgh to let everyone know about the Day of Judgment, you probably would choose the top of St Giles.
It's a good place to land.
That's where I would go personally if it was up to me.
I mean, you and Stephen have already, pretty much proven that it's the there's cathedral of Edinburgh. I was convinced.
Oh, thank you. Refers to our previous podcast, which is also available if you'd like to listen.
Yeah.
So there's this huge kind of panic on the streets. Luckily for the goat, however, the bellkeeper woke up. So there would have been someone who kind of spent their nights and days in that area, and they would have been responsible for tolling the bells at kind of appropriate times. So he woke up, realised what was going on. The 2 students actually managed to escape. Luckily, the goat was saved, and I hope lived a long and happy life.
I hope so too. I think that goat deserves a really good retirement.
Yeah, I hope it got a nice church pension because it deserves.
Yeah, it deserves it. I mean, there's a lot of nice sort of rural church sites, better for goats than St Giles Cathedral.
Yeah, then the roof was
on a farm, man. It's just on a farm. It's happy.
The 2 students were actually forced to flee to America because what they had done was so kind of awful and had caused so much panic. So we don't know what happened to them, but their descendants.
One of the students was my great-great-great-grandfather.
Oh, Matt, can you imagine? That would be a great reveal.
That would be crazy. To be fair, I think our family tree's only been done on my mom's side, so although the other side's Irish.
So the next little anecdote is a bit of a strange one as well. So this is from 1798, and I found it in a copy of Life and Work from July 1980. It's written by the Reverend James A. Simpson, if anyone is interested, and it's entitled The Kirk and Gulf. And basically, there was in 1798, there was a challenge issued to the burgess of the St Giles Golfing Club to see if 2 members could drive a golf ball over the spire of St Giles Cathedral. So I think I've got the names here. Oh, so these golf balls, which would have been made out of feathers, were capable of being hit about half the distance of a modern golf ball.
Made out of feathers.
Made out of feathers and like encased in leather, I guess. That's how they were made. If anyone's interested in the science of golf balls from the late 1700s.
Well, being a good Fife girl, golf is one of the oldest sports, right? I'm sure that's.
I'm going to say
history.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also Bruntsfield Links is the oldest short form golf course. I'm so out of my depth. I think.
Yeah, I know.
The oldest golf course in the world. No one hired us to know anything about golf. So
no.
We're just we're trying our best.
We'll hopefully not be spreading misinformation. It's pretty old.
It's pretty old.
Nice, including ambiguous sentence.
So the two men who were chosen were called Mr. Smelly and Mr. Scales, I think is how you pronounce it.
Are those like nom de plume of golf?
I'm not sure. It sounds like it, but they're also they're spelt like they could be real names. I'm not going to tell you the spelling, but they're quite sort of Scottish spellings. So they were chosen. They're allowed 6 balls each, and we're told that the balls passed even higher than the Weathercock, and were actually found in Advocates' Close. So there you go. It is possible to hit a golf ball over the top of St Giles and over. That's one of the things that the Weathercock would have seen. A couple of golf balls whizzing past.
Nice. Where were they hitting from?
It doesn't say.
Right?
It doesn't say. I would imagine like maybe Parliament Square, West Parliament Square would be my guess.
That makes sense.
I think that's pretty much all the anecdotes I have. The quick one that I wanted to do, which I really like and is much more recent, it's like from 2 years ago, is that, so I mentioned before that I do these tower tours. I think Stephen, who is the other member of this podcast, actually started doing them originally, and they've gone through a few people before they finally ended up in my hands. And so my predecessor was kind of telling me about it when I first started working, and obviously the first question I asked her was, has anything really exciting happened on these tours? And she said the strangest thing that has ever happened to her was that someone proposed to her in the tower. No, that's completely wrong. Someone proposed to the other person while she's in the tower. That would have been even crazier.
I was sort of nodding along like, oh, I've heard of this. And I was like, wait.
So basically she was talking to them beforehand. So you do a little bit of a introductory sort of contextual spiel at the beginning before you take people up to the tower. And he said to her, he was like, I'm going to propose, so I kind of need you to create the perfect moment for it. Could you do that? Could you maybe be like, hey, this would be a great place to propose to somebody? So she kind of had to say yes. And they got up there and she was doing her usual bit, being like, that's Holyrood Palace. If you look over here, you can see the gargoyles that we still have on the roof. All of this sort of thing. And then she kind of had to look out and be like, wow, this would be a great place to propose to somebody, and then sort of scurry back and you proposed.
And for context in the place Ciara is talking about, when you scurry back, there's like 3 feet of space to scurry back to?
Yeah, there's not a lot of room.
You cannot scurry far away.
Often when I take couples up and they want to take really romantic pictures of themselves, which you should absolutely do because it's a very beautiful view, there's a little walkway where you can see out on either side of the Royal Mile, and then you have the tower itself. And sometimes I just have to step into the tower and like close the door and hide behind the door so they can get like an all shot, and then I come back out again.
It's a good walkway. That is a romantic spot.
It is a romantic spot.
You get some good like sort of audio of different bagpipers playing. It's like not so loud because you're right next to them, so you're up high.
Yeah, sometimes they sort of cross over and you get the Skyboat song and Amazing Grace, and they kind of hit a point in the cathedral and you can hear them. It's very nice. Jess had told me before we started that she had a little theory about the crown spire, which she has held back and refused to tell me until the end. So I'm very excited to hear what it is, Jess.
All right, if you're ready. So I was just noticing that of the sort of dates of the crown spire, I think ours, you were saying, was between 1495 to 1500. Is that?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. So it is exactly the same date as the other surviving crown spire in Scotland, which is at King's College Chapel in Aberdeen, and was founded by Bishop Elphinstone in 1495, and like I think funded by James IV. This is going to be very niche, so just get ready, Ciara. All right, here's my deep dive into an incredibly niche theory for you all. Earlier on, we were hearing how our crown spire was built between 1495 and 1500. And then I noticed that the one other surviving crown spire in Scotland, which is at King's College Chapel in Aberdeen. That was built in 1495 as well. And that was founded by Bishop Elphinstone, but partially funded by James IV. So these both would have been during James IV reign. And then I was like, I wonder if there's a particular reason that these two crown spires are being built then, because I think, I'm trying to remember what Stephen actually said. But the sort of crown spire thing, I mean, obviously it's a crown, so a little bit of royal symbolism there with the imperial rounded crown at the top, could have been a display of power. So I went a little deep dive into James IV, and he had been defeating a rebellion and was sort of like reclaiming his power over Scotland. So there was a rebellion that he defeated in 1489. And then in 1493, that's when the Lord of the Isles, who is like the sort of guy vying for power out in the west coast of Scotland and on all the islands, that was when the Lord of the Isles finally sort of like admitted defeat and became under the control of James IV and the Scottish king. So yeah, I just thought that was fun, that it was sort of like there was these building projects which now we remember as part of our own buildings, but also back then, as always with sort of like art and architecture, there's a little bit of like passive aggressive like power display too. So there you go. I think he was invading little bits of England too, and then they eventually had a treaty. And then, as I'm sure you know, he married Henry VII's daughter, Margaret Tudor. So that's how we get the English and Scottish royal bloodlines combining yet again.
Oh, and he married her at Holyrood Abbey, I want to say.
He did,
is that right?
Oh yeah, I've been to
Holyrood Abbey. I've read the info signs.
Yeah, you might have seen the portrait of her with a baby marmoset, which she had as a pet, which she brought up from England, which, if you don't think about the sort of animal keeping side, I always think it's like, oh, pretty cute.
That's pretty cute. And so you say that he was kind of trying to take parts of North England as well, is that right?
Yeah, I think he was involved. He was supporting the pretender to the throne.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I wonder if you would have seen Newcastle, the Newcastle Crown Spire, and been like, yeah, I'll take one of them.
I'll emulate that.
Yeah, very interesting. Well, I think that's a really good place to end it. A little bit of historical intrigue for you all to mull over.
And if anyone knows any more, do please tell us, because we're always open to learning more.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we'd love to hear from you. As we said before, the email that you can reach us on is info@stgilescathedral.org.uk. I'd like to thank Stephen for doing the introduction. That was really great. And Jess for bringing so many excellent facts about weather vanes and similar to the table.
And a big thank you to you, Ciara, for all your excellent anecdotes about the rooftop tour fun. Or what is it? Tower
tours.
Tower tour, but Tower Tour team. That's your
Tower Tour team. Oh yeah, at the start I'm always like, hi guys, welcome to the tour. You are my Tower Tour team for the day. I don't know why I do it. Nobody ever enjoys it, but Jess does.
Wonderful. I really liked it. It really, when I went on Ciara's tour, that was one of the things that apparently imprinted into my brain. So there you go. It lasts.
The final thing that we need to say is St Giles has been really, really great about keeping on all of its staff, and we really appreciate that. One of the things that we've been able to do is work on side projects like this. So if you have enjoyed it, or even if you haven't enjoyed it but you'd still like to support us, please consider donating, and we will have a link to make donating easier as soon as possible. So thank you very much, and we will see you in the virtual world next time.
Thank you for listening.